Hi, I'm Tasha Broomhall from Blooming Minds. Looking forward to talking today about my PhD research into psychosocial safety.
Welcome back to Do Yourself a Favour. I am delighted to be here with Tasha Broomhall today. We were saying before we started that we've got a great advantage today because Tasha has been here before. We talked about life and love and all those things last time. So this time, as is my want this year, I'm trying very hard to be more targeted and have it be very useful for the listener. So I was lucky enough to be on Tasha's webinar a couple of weeks ago about her PhD results. I said to her at the time, and I will repeat here, it was a really healing experience to be on that webinar. And I think in the comments at some point I put testify with the prayer hands because when you spoke in that webinar, and people will know here as they see the kind of guests I have, I'm very passionate about human beings feeling well at work and feeling respected. And I get very frustrated that that doesn't happen, but I don't have a lot of impact, particularly at the moment in that world. So if I can support you or Tammy or Tanya or people that are doing the good work, I so appreciate you. And in that webinar, the holistic nature of what you said, it felt like, yes, that's right. It's not a tick box thing. It's not an easy thing. It's layer upon layer. And we thought we'd talk a bit more about that today so other people could find out what I found out by joining you then. So welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, I'm delighted to have you back. I really love the work you do. I also promised myself I wouldn't gush too much this year, but can't help it. You make such a difference. And I just really appreciate the difference you make.
That's very kind. Thank you.
Wow, it's really true. So sometimes I don't know how you do it, but you do. So, yeah, thanks. Where shall we start in terms of your PhD?
So last time I was here, you very kindly put out the call to your listeners and through your social media to help us to recruit some participants. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
So maybe I could start by, for those people who didn't attend the webinar, start by telling them what the research was focused on.
Oh, yeah, that'd be wonderful.
Okay, so I was really curious about understanding how workers are experiencing the new psychosocial safety regulations. So we've heard a lot in the last few years across Australia about this drive to really embed psychosocial safety regulations in workplace practice. And often I hear a lot of fear-mongering about it of, oh, now we've got these responsibilities or now we've got to do this. And I think that there's a real opportunity to demystify some of that. I don't think we need quite so much fear-mongering.
Yes.
But what I was really interested in was, based on how it's currently being approached, how does that feel for workers and particularly for leaders in workplaces who are being charged with the responsibility to address some of the regulatory requirements? And I was not sure how effectively that's being done currently. So I wanted to find out, not just my opinion or my perspective on what I'm seeing, but more broadly, what are the patterns that we can see around both workers and leaders' experiences?
Yeah, how wonderful. So I don't have the most optimistic guess around what you found out, but I could be being cynical. Was everything wonderful out there, Tasha?
It was really fascinating. So I did a series of interviews with people and found some pretty clear results, and then wanted to ensure that what we were seeing in those interviews was more, demonstrative of what was more widely being experienced. So did the survey and found out that, yes, those results held, and the results were, I think, some concerns, but also some optimism.
Oh, great.
And so in terms of the concerns, there was some really overall findings around leaders in particular not feeling confident in how to address psychosocial safety. So a high awareness that we need to do something in this space. And by high awareness, I don't mean everyone was aware. There was some leaders who had never heard of the term, had no idea how their workplace was addressing it. There were some leaders who had heard of the term, but still had no idea how their workplace was addressing it. Including some very senior leaders in very large organisations that I was surprised by, because I would have thought that there would be a pathway to addressing their requirements in those sorts of organisations, and there wasn't. And in terms of that lack of process, what then came from that was, if leaders were aware that they had these obligations, but it wasn't clear to them how they were meant to meet those obligations, then a level of uncertainty and discomfort, and in some cases fear by those leaders around, well, how on earth do I do this if there's no actual pathway?
Yes.
And then what fell out of that was really interesting, was some leaders then going and doing their own approach. So a bit of a DIY approach, which runs its own risks.
Yeah.
So if we've got a large organisation and we've got 50 different leaders that are each taking it on their own back to go and do their own approach, there's not going to be consistency, or there's a risk of no consistency. There's a risk that if they're not subject matter experts, they may not get this right. So if they're learning on the go, which lots of them described, spending a lot of their own time outside of work to try to learn how to do this.
Wow.
From a really good intention of, I have these responsibilities, but I also want to do it well for my workers.
So I could hear that when you said that. If people are spending their own time, the legality element would bring up a level of fear and responsibility, but I could hear in what you just said, it wasn't just about that. It was, I actually want to be a good leader and I want to make a difference, but I don't really know how.
Yes. And for some of them, was really interesting. They could see what was going wrong in their workplace, so particular industry pressures or particular organisational challenges that were afoot, and they could see that, and so that drove them even more to want to do this well, because they wanted to fix what they saw as current issues. But again, that lack of a systems approach by the organisation meant that they were DIYing it, and that then comes with risks that they might not have the full picture. They might be applying something in one area which could unexpectedly have flow-on effects in other areas. So there were two theories I used in my research that kind of underpin the approach that you take and how you examine and analyse the information. And those two theories were self-determination theory, which I can tell you about in a minute, and then systems thinking. And so what the regulations say, so across Australia in the regulations and the codes of practice, there's mention of the fact that organisations need to take a systematic approach.
Right.
So you can't just do piecemeal approaches. You need to actually look at systems. We need to be looking at how the systems of work and the way we design and manage work are either putting people at risk of exposure to psychosocial hazards or removing that risk. So we need to take that systems approach.
Yes.
And so by using systems thinking, that's what I was examining. So what are the systems? And I don't know if this is going to be really interesting to your listeners. I get a little bit nerdy. But I really love systems thinking because it has this inbuilt acknowledgement of this element called wicked problems. And I just love that word, right?
Yeah,
like
me
wicked
too.
problems. It just seems like a lovely phrase to use. But it's also something I've seen in workplaces. So when I first read years ago the research around it, it just landed because I felt like, oh, I've seen that. You see one decision is made here and it's made with great intent and good resourcing, but it has this unexpected flow-on effect over here, which causes these problems for other people that really could have been forethought if we'd actually looked at the whole of the system flow. And so when I took that into this research, we were looking at, if I am a leader and I'm doing my DIY approach here in my team, there could be some wicked problems that then occur in other areas of the business or even other areas of my team because I haven't done a whole systems approach. I've just focused on where I've got influence in my level.
Yes, and when you talk about that systems approach, if I'm at a particular level in an organisation, this might not be an appropriate question, so you can tell me. When one wants to look at this idea of using systems thinking, understanding there's a whole organism in play, which part of the business would look at creating those?
Brilliant question. And I think lots of businesses are grappling with that at the moment in reality.
Right.
So I can tell you what I observe, and I can tell you what we think should happen instead.
Okay, great. Perfect.
So what I observe is often in Australian businesses, we're seeing it's the safety teams that are being told this is part of work health and safety regulations, so you should be looking at this. But they often don't have a lot of agency and influence over the whole organisation in terms of getting all of the information. They've often got great relationships and connections through the business, but they don't often have, or they don't always have, the capacity to get all the information and the data they need. They've got amazing skill sets usually in work health and safety, but they may not understand some of the nuances from a HR perspective or an employee relations perspective or an organisational development perspective. So when organisations are just saying, well, you in safety are responsible for this, or the language we hear a lot with corporates is who owns it?
Oh, yes.
So it's HR that owns it or it's safety that owns it. That is problematic because that's not taking a systems approach right from the design. So what should be happening instead is that we actually need to bring in together all the different players that have expertise to add into a reference group, a working group, some form of a cohesive that is able to say, well, these are the different elements we bring. So I was talking to a client yesterday about some of the work that they're doing in this space, and I was saying, well, what's your diversity group doing? What are their plans for the year? What are your people and culture people doing? What's going on from a learning and development perspective? Let's actually get everyone in the room so that we can hear those different perspectives. We can see who's got what on the calendar, what initiatives are actually already meeting the objectives that we want, that we can piggyback onto, we can help support. So we're actually collaborating together rather than those departments so often being siloed. Even when they come under the same umbrella, which so often they do now, they still aren't working necessarily collaboratively together. And that is, I think, a big mistake.
Yes.
And then the other part of it is who develops that systematic approach. Is it's not just about breadth across the organisation, it's about through the depth of the organisation. So we're working with an organisation that's got this really great system in place where they've got a reference group, they've got representatives from all those different departments, but they've also got executives on that group, right through every level of management to frontline workers. And it is gold.
I was going to say you can feel, I mean, I use that kind of language a lot. It's the opposite of the science you're talking about, right? But that feels so right in terms of what is actually going to make a difference. Because I think one of the things that's occurred to me as a non-expert in this area is what can often happen where there is great intention, and in psychosocial risk and legislation around it, there's this great intention to protect people. But when someone says, okay, work health and safety, it's yours, the flavour has much more of that. We've done what we need to do, tick box, we're not going to get gotten, versus that last example where you gave, what will this actually look like and who are the right people to be talking about it so it actually is safe.
So I remember that very first reference group meeting for that organisation, and, you know, we need to make sure that everyone in that room feels safe to contribute, to share ideas, to challenge things. We need to make sure that the hierarchical norms don't just play out in that room, that while we wait for the executives in the room to speak or we just say yes to whatever they've suggested. Like we need to actually break down some of those patterns. And so we had this very first session and was taking them through a process to do this. And one of the executives, we had an idea that came up from the group about an action that could be implemented. And one of the executives was like, well, let's just do that tomorrow. Like, absolutely, brilliant idea. And it was great to have that level of sponsorship to say, yes, this is a priority, we'll make it happen. And I saw somebody on the edge of the table that I was at, and there was just a reaction. And I thought, there's a story there. What is that reaction about? And so we ended up getting this person to speak, and they were able to tell us why that solution was not going to work. Not going to work tomorrow, not going to work next week, because this particular part of the system did not actually work, was not currently available to all employees. So yes, that'll be great for those of you in the head office in Perth, but for the rest of us, we can't access that system. So just putting it there is not going to be viable. And it took about 20 minutes for every level in the room to actually acknowledge that this was the current truth.
Okay.
Because it was so far removed from their own experience. They were like, no, but everyone can. No, we can't. No, but you just haven't tried. No, we can't. And so it was this really fascinating process of thinking through the whole of the system that we can't come up with a solution here and just rubber stamp it and assume it's going to be implemented and then be surprised when it's not, because the system currently doesn't have the capacity to do what we're asking it to. So that would take another step of actually putting in place some extra resources, elements. And why I think that's really important is we often make these abstract decisions for organisations are made in rooms without the people represented in that room who actually have to implement the decision.
Oh, yes. It's such a common and frustrating thing. I can think of a client of ours where they had the L&D kind of department for numerous years would never actually interact with the operational level and ask what they need, never. And that's where we got our work from because we were able to assist where they didn't. And eventually they brought in people who actually spoke to the people who would get the result of the training. And it actually ended our work with that company. But when I emailed the fellow in L&D who'd made these differences, I said, look, I should be more upset, but I'm so delighted to see that you are finally asking the people who need the help, what do they need, what will work, rather than just doing stuff to them, which was always their experience. It was wonderful. When you talk about that room and someone it's very interesting. You picked up the body language or the physical movement to say there's an issue there. Your skill as a facilitator and a leader of groups allowed that conversation to come out. What it makes me think is a comment that I believe Tanya said when she was here, Tanya Hallett. Psychosocial risk can only actually be looked at usefully if there's already a level of psychological safety for people to talk. It's quite meta, isn't it, in terms of what has the risk higher or lower, but then to resolve the risk, people have to feel safe in a room like that to say, yes, very senior person, that won't work where we're located. It literally doesn't exist. Can you imagine they would have said anything if you weren't there?
I think they do now. So
Okay.
I'm now out of that active role with that group, but that's why we're there in the beginning, to facilitate that building of that safety, to have those conversations. So to make sure that people are able to then do that for each other and that the norm has been set in the room, that in this room, it's not just about hierarchy. In this room, this is actually what we're all contributing to. And there's a whole process that we took them through to define the goals and define what they would each contribute to that and how that would be maintained by the group. So
it was another example really of their cleverness and willingness to look at it fully, that they thought, we will have you support us.
And they've just been a delight to work with because they're like that as an organisation.
Wow.
They're really a learning organisation. They're really curious about how do we do this better. And what I love about them, and so many of the clients we get to work with, is their goal is not how do we just tick a box, because if that's your goal, we're probably not your provider, right? Their goal is how do we make work better for people so that actually work is a positive experience and we know it can help us to flourish. We know it can give us great elements to our own well-being. So how do we optimise that while also minimising or eliminating those risks? So the focus isn't just on the risks, it's on the whole of the person and their experience at work. And I really love working
me
with clients
too.
on that.
It's so wonderful. I agree. I was actually talking to a friend this morning and he was doing some work for a company and he said, I just love it when I work with people that are aligned to my values. And I can hear in what you say there, I'm so glad that company exists and there are other companies like it. And it kind of underpins what I was saying before about it. They're not about the tick box, because there's no reduction in risk if it is tick box. It has to be, this was actually brought in to protect human beings from suffering and the massive consequences of that. If you're just going, well, what do we need to do to not get in trouble? That's a very different perspective to how do we have people thrive and enjoy their families when they're not at work and not have to have stress leave.
But I understand when there's not clear pathways why people do just default to the what do we have to do so we're not in trouble. I understand that, because if it doesn't if it doesn't feel clear to you how to actually get there, how do you even start if you don't have that knowledge? If you're just hearing this fear-mongering about these regulations are going to, it's going to get you.
That's absolutely
I
right.
have great compassion for people that are just trying to figure this out because I think it is complicated. I've spent 26 years working around this space and the last, 19 years working very closely in this space and 10 years researching in this space. So it's not something that I think we can be expecting people just to be able to make up because it's not clear. And there's so many different options, but there's also some real possibility in those options. The fact that it doesn't look the same in every organisation is okay because different organisations have got different ecosystems, they've got different pressures, they've got different internal or external industry pressures. And so we do need to be able to take bespoke approaches and that can sometimes feel a little bit unsettling because we sometimes just want the certainty of this is what I should do. And I think that there's a lot of nuance in this space.
Yeah, that's really good. You helped me with my own levels of compassion around the people involved and all the things they're managing in their roles, and then this being another thing. And if they don't have the setup or don't have the support but have the fear, I might make a mistake. I'm not even aware of mistake and being a mistake. And we know this can happen even generationally where people are, I had no idea that would be offensive, not even badly intended, just ignorant. So is it possible to answer this question? I don't know. There's an organisation, let's make up an organisation, and there's a well-intentioned manager of a group of people. They understand psychosocial risk, they understand the new laws coming in, but they've had to do what you've said and learn more about it themselves. There's not systems in place. They're a mid-level manager. What is the difference between where they're at and where they need to be, and can they have any influence on that?
It's a challenge because mid-level managers are often given a huge amount of responsibility, but not necessarily the agency to make the changes that need to be made. They don't necessarily have the capacity to bring in more resources, to change significant deadlines or deliverables. And so we're often squashing them. And that was another one of my findings was those leaders who are trying to address this are often feeling that they are then ending up with excessive pressure and distress, and that they were finding for them in their organisation, they're being told you have to address this for your staff, but who's addressing it for them?
Yes.
And who's actually looking after them? And so I do feel that there are some real risks in organisations by just relying on good mid-level managers to actually manage this for you, because you're then exposing the organisation to potential hazard exposure for those individuals, which then could lead to risk.
Oh, yeah, because the irony of the whole thing is when we're afraid as human beings, we can't think the most clearly, we can't be the most generous with others, we're most reactive. So you've got, and I've met so many of these people you're talking about, they're just the best. And because of the pressures they're under, they often won't be able to perform the way they'd most want to with their staff. They often have their full-time technical job plus they're a manager, plus they're told now you need to take care of this. And actually it was interesting because Tammy yesterday put an article on LinkedIn about this idea that managers are starting to, and this is layperson's term, but starting to really check out from their feeling of disempowerment. And it was funny because she tagged you in it and I said, you just beat me to it. So when you see that, I think you'll find it very interesting. It was only just yesterday. And it was this idea of, which makes sense to me, as a manager, you've tried and tried and tried for however long, taken on whatever level of responsibility. It makes sense to me that at some point the manager will go, look, I'm just going to do just what needs to be done. I cannot stay involved at this level without the support above me. I have family, I have my life. I've got to survive this rather than flourish in it.
Yeah.
And, of course, then the trickle-down impact is huge.
Yeah.
But it's understandable.
Yeah. And what's the alternative? If the organisation isn't putting in systems and supports, it's either the manager puts those boundaries in and does what's reasonable, which is reasonable,
yes,
or they overextend themselves. So I worked with a leader last week who every weekend for the last year that they can recall, every single weekend for the last year, they have worked to do the work that their staff don't have the time to do. So the staff are not getting through all the work so that the manager can manage the hazard exposure for the staff. The manager is taking on that work and doing 2 extra days a week on top of their BAU so that they can actually avoid the staff's exposure to the hazard, but therefore putting themselves at risk. And they were talking about their exhaustion, their distress that they're experiencing, probably close to burnout, if not already there. And then what's the cost of that? Both the human cost to that person. We know some people, when they leave work after burnout, sometimes they don't return to the workforce ever. If they do, they might return to a very different capacity than what they were before. And that can be loss of sense of self and identity and, that career pathway that you had envisioned for yourself. It can be financial impacts. The impact on a human can actually be really significant, let alone the impacts on that business. You had somebody who was overextending themselves to meet what were unrealistic demands on a team, and now they're no longer going to be there, so you have to replace them. So the cost to businesses, it doesn't really make sense why we don't actually look at the long cost and resource properly now so that we're avoiding that long cost. We kick the can down the road.
Yes.
And it seems like very bad business sense to me, but it's happening consistently across lots of sectors and not everywhere, but where it is happening, it seems like a really silly business decision.
Yeah, I really agree. I often am very confused about the lack of awareness of the financial impacts of bad management of this area. My own theory, it's only my own theory, is that when people have a particular way or a particular focus in business around productivity or finance, etc., anything that touches on the human side of things, because it's not either an area of interest or an area they're comfortable looking at, I think they find it much easier to just say, eye roll soft skills. But the reason I often like to talk about money is that might re-engage their interest because it's costing a fortune and it will only get worse as generations that actually know how to care for themselves come through. Because, that manager working on the weekend, there's a real particular personality in play there that is very common in our generation, and companies have really been able to take advantage of, not even intentionally take advantage, because there's no squeaky wheel. It doesn't need oil. The person sucks it up. Eventually they fall in a heap and leave. And like you said, it can impact really the rest of their life, let alone their working life. But there's a lot of slack being taken up by the good intentions of people. And you're right about kicking the can down the road. It's going to come to a grinding halt right at some point, even if it is generationally. It's going to be, this cannot keep going.
Yeah. Tricky. So the other findings, so as well as the findings around the leaders, another really significant finding was around this phenomenon we've called psychosocial silence, which is the silence in organisations that pervades around psychosocial hazards. That means that, so let me think of some examples. So in some organisations, the employees were told this is important, we're focusing on it, but instead of the psychosocial hazard workshop that was put on actually covering psychosocial safety, it covered psychological safety, which is not part of the regulatory requirements. Yes, baseline important that people can talk and share things, but the employees and the leaders were clear what you've come and delivered to us was not what was on the packing, right? So why are you talking about, why are you not talking about what our actual hazard exposure is, what are the things that we're doing about it? So they didn't then have confidence that in their organisation there was the knowledge to actually address this topic. And in fairness to people, those two terms have been so conflated that actually it's no wonder that they're confused at times, but that would be the job, you would imagine, of the workshop to actually clarify it. And when they were in the workshop and it wasn't clarified and it was confused, it made people feel even less confident in their organisation. I was going to say it's
worse.
And so then the organisation was saying, so if you've got a problem with this, come and talk to us. And my participants were saying, to who? Like, you don't even know what it is that you were meant to be telling us about. So I don't have much confidence that this system actually really wants to do anything other than tick a box.
Got it.
So it felt really transactional for people. Another more insidious element of that silence was when people did raise concerns about hazard exposure, and, great examples of people doing it in complaint processes, examples of people taking it to their direct leaders or to, other departments in the organisation they'd been told they could take these issues to, or it being acknowledged in exit interviews that they would say, look, this is what was going on and part of my experience, that they were actually silenced at that point. So some people were being told, we don't really want to know about it, or we don't really have a system for reporting that at the moment. Yes, we've told you that it's important to us, but no, we don't have a system for reporting it or addressing it. And other people who felt that their employment was threatened because of them making the complaints. So somebody particularly who was a migrant worker sharing stories about when bullying complaints were made, that their visa status was raised. So you're on a working visa. This is something that maybe you don't want to do. And so what we identified was that for particular workers, there were additional risks of this silence being pervasive, and those were workers that had intersectionality in their identity. So you had a form of diversity. So you might be so we had a participant who was a woman who describes herself as neurodivergent, multiply disabled and queer. And so there were multiple elements of diversity barriers that she experienced in her encounters in that workplace, where she felt that her individual experiences were not understood and not being accommodated for or supported, and that her voice was then being silenced. And there were multiple examples of people with that. So a young female in a male-dominated workplace where there was some incredibly inappropriate behaviour of a sexual nature that was occurring that she witnessed. She was not subjected to directly, but she witnessed, and the silence that persisted around that from really senior leaders. And her example was that she was dealing with that ongoing all the time. This was not a long time in the past. This was a current ongoing experience that she had had across her workplace, where when people did exhibit those really inappropriate behaviours, they were either asked to leave, and in which case not given any genuine consequences from her perspective.
Yes.
Being asked to leave is not the same as having a consequence that your behaviour is not tolerated.
Yes.
So you get to walk out rather than
Yes.
be shown out. But also, her concern that person's then going to be doing that in their next workplace.
Yeah.
And there might be other people who are vulnerable to those behaviours in that workplace.
Yeah, that silence element that you talk about, I had a consultant friend talking to me about, I think, what might be connected, where they had a support service in the business for people to talk about their concerns or vulnerabilities. And when the psychosocial risk legislation came out, the particular company said, you need to document whatever they say to you and give it back to us. But the whole idea of them talking to the external person was confidentiality and safety. So it was almost like this sort of coming from the more legislative or tick box side, and I might be mistaken, so let me know. That silence to me sounds like we don't want any record of this, because then it increases our risk. We could look bad or literally have a legal system in play or situation in play. We're going to pretend it never happened because then we don't have to do anything with it.
Potentially. So I had participants who felt that they had been coerced into signing NDAs. So they'd made complaints, their complaints were founded, and they were paid to leave the organisation with an NDA. In place, and for some of them they felt that they'd been quite vulnerable at that point, and that I think that there is this bigger ethical question around, at a point we're getting someone to sign an NDA, are they actually, one of my participants was concerned about financial support for their family, and if I'm leaving this workplace, what am I doing to actually support my family, and that that insistence on you don't get your payout unless you sign this NDA, or you can take us through the processes, which is a potentially protracted process. I think that there's a bit of grottiness, a bit of grubbiness around some of those practices, which aren't human-centred, and we are just sometimes trying to kick that problem down the road and silence it and brush it under the carpet, and that's taking away people's sense of agency. But it also means that you've not met your legal obligations, because your obligations are to minimise these risks as far as reasonably practicable.
Yes.
That doesn't mean what do we do to get away with it. It means what do we actually do to go in our system, even if you decide that you're going to leave and we're going to do an exit process with you. What do we need to do to look at and examine what's happened in our system that allowed your experience to happen in the first place?
Yes.
So we've got that obligation in organisations, but when we're just trying to silence people and silence the problem, we're just kicking it down the road rather than actually addressing our systemic responsibilities.
There's two things. One, am I right in thinking that the intention of the legal element or the legislation is to encourage proactive creation of a reduction in risk? I think I've said that back to front, but you get the idea.
They have a positive duty to.
Yeah.
So you can't just respond once a risk is identified. There's a positive duty to prevent.
The other thing which has come up in my recent conversations with human-centred people like yourself is I think culturally and for so many decades, I think there has been an agreement around the lack of humanity in business, and decisions are rationalised. For me, as an outsider, often it would seem too easily rationalised without taking into consideration what that actually does to the human being. And I think because there's a broad agreement that it's business or it's money or we have to take care of the shareholders or whatever rhetoric plays out. I remember one recently, and there was a staff member who was underperforming, and the truth was they couldn't fulfil the role and they needed to be supported through the process of them leaving. But when I discussed with the people how it would work, the way they were going to do it was so damaging to the person through lack of communication and lack of transparency and leaving them in the role for longer whilst they knew something was wrong and all those torturous things that happen. And when I challenged them on it, the answer was kind of what I'm saying in terms of, well, we've got to make it the easiest for us, the least expensive, the least risk of follow-up. And there wasn't really a difficulty for the particular people I was talking to about, this actually feels immoral. This feels like as one human being doing to another, are you considering how much they are going to suffer both now but ongoingly? And I don't know. I know people like yourself, like Tammy, like Tanya, like me from a distance. I know things are changing and will change, but what is going to have work, understand it has human beings in it?
So I had a participant who was in a really senior leadership role who said, in WA, this hasn't been tested in court yet, has it, the new regulations? No. He said, so when it gets tested and there's a big dollar amount next to it, that's probably when it'll get high enough on our priority list. And I caught my breath and I was really fascinated because this leader had demonstrated lots of examples of how they really care for their people and how they value what their people do in their organisation. And it didn't feel like rhetoric. It felt like genuine examples. And yet this disconnect was there, that the business reality that you're talking about is that until this is actually enough of a priority for us to focus on, we won't. And I just don't think it has to be that way. I actually think we can humanise work in much simpler ways. I was working with a group this morning and we talked about 2 tips, not from my research but from other research, around what we can do to try to enhance some of the positives of work. And so we talked about that self-determination theory, which was one of the theories in my research that I used. And self-determination theory by 2 theorists, Decky and Ryan, suggests or demonstrates that we've got 3 basic human needs. So competence, autonomy, relatedness, 3 needs that all of us, and it, applies cross-culturally and across lots of different diversity factors. And so if we understand those 3 needs, and this was one of my findings, was how do we design and manage work to bring those 3 needs as the forefront? So how do leaders understand that as a model? How do leaders design and manage work with those 3 needs in mind? So how do we not thwart those needs? I love that word. But Decky and Ryan talk about the thwarting of the needs or the frustrating of the needs. So how do we make sure we're not thwarting or frustrating those needs? How do we think about the way that I communicate with you as my staff member, that I'm actually meeting those needs? And when those needs are not going to be met, that we actually can talk about, hey, I get this is going to be a bit wonky for you because of this, but this is my rationale, or this is why we're doing it, or this is how we're approaching it. So in my research, that came through really clearly, that if organisations can take a self-determination theory approach to the way we're designing and managing work, that could actually be a really solid foundation for building a psychosocial safety on. And in this group this morning, what I was talking to them about was, well, what does that look like practically? So from other people's research, 2 simple ideas. 1, there's research that says if you, as a leader, spend 10 minutes per week with each employee talking about non-task related things. So it's building that relatedness, right? Now, we do need to be careful that we don't get into unsafe for work territory in that 10 minutes. And I'm not going to ask you about your dating life or, anything inappropriate. We're going to let the employee lead how much of themselves they share with us and have that conversation. But it's about not being just task focused and not being just transactional, that you're here to do these tasks. It's that I see you as a person, right? And then the second thing was around our technology use in workplaces and what has become the norm in your team. And so I challenge them to reflect on, next time you come into a team meeting or into a one-on-one meeting, where are people's devices and what are they doing with them? If I'm sitting there and I'm talking to you and I'm holding my device and I'm scrolling through it while I'm talking to you, that tells us something in terms of our level of engagement. But in many workplaces, that is normalised. It is accepted. And what we can see in some research around that is that actually just having a mobile phone in the room with us, upside down on the table, not even touching it, reduces the other person's sense of engagement with you because they know how tied we are to every ding and ping and, half a samba that comes out of those things, that it grabs our attention and it grabs our energy. And so just having it visible can reduce people's sense of engagement. So to actually practice just putting it away, making the habit of putting it away. And when I first started reading this research years ago, because I work mainly from a home office, so I started the practice of when my boys would come in, they're coming from school in the afternoon and barrel through, I would turn away from the computer or I would put my laptop screen down. And it really dramatically changed those afternoon conversations from being a quick transactional check-in to actually a conversation. And using it in work, we find the same. And we've had some leaders in the last couple of years that we've done that with as a challenge, and they've talked about how it's transformed those relationships. So if we look big picture, I probably think that we need organisations to be proactive in this space in a systems thinking approach before we get the court cases to come through, because there's too many humans that can be damaged in the meantime. That risk I don't think is reasonable, but I actually think the business risk in terms of the financial implications of damaging people in the meantime is also a really bad reason to continue doing it in the way that some are doing it, and not all, but some. But I think that we don't have to wait till we've designed the whole system. We can start to embed some really simple principles of how do we lead with those sorts of ideas in mind right from now. And they're simple things. Leaders can really simply see, how could I apply just those 2 ideas just this month? And that might start the ball rolling.
I love it. You've said it perfectly, but I can't help but repeat it. So at a higher level, looking at the system, so there's the working support in the background. But what I loved about what you just said is, I think when we're thinking about these things or thinking about the corporate world, it can seem so complex. And actually, when people say to Andy or I, when they're a new leader, what do you think are the top tips you could give me? We say, meet with your people face to face often. And if you make a mistake, admit it. right? So I love that if people are listening to this and are in a position of management or in a position of, we don't have systems, and what am I meant to do? And I'm under the pump. Just looking at, are you literally connecting with your people? Are you respecting them as people? And are you allowing them to do their jobs without sacrificing yourself?
Yeah.
It is small things that will make an incredibly big difference, right?
And it boosts that leader's sense of competence. So their basic need of having the competence to do this stuff is really fractured when their organisation's not giving them the support and the systems, but there's all this rhetoric coming at them. So one of the participants was a senior leader in a different organisation, and they said, this has got to be the most common term that is in every single leadership meeting I've been in the last 18 months. They talk about psychosocial safety. I said, that's fascinating. So what is your organisation's approach? He said, we don't have one. We talk about it, but we don't actually have an approach. So I wouldn't know how we address it here. And he said, as a senior leader with, massive span of control, a huge proportion of people in the organisation reporting up through other leaders to him, he said that doesn't make sense, does it? Like, if that's something we're talking about so much, why do I not know what we're doing about it? And I think that if we can take it back down to that granular, well, at a local level as a leader, I can be doing this. I can be focused on that competence, autonomy, relatedness with my people. I can actually look at addressing psychosocial safety with my people, not for them. So the regulations require that we consult and engage with the workforce. But that's also a bit of a tricky one, that organisations don't necessarily know what to do, and it's not prescriptive. It doesn't say you have to do this kind of engagement, you have to do this particular process. But what that means is that organisations are sometimes then doing nothing.
Yes.
But actually the simplest thing to do is to think of, well, what do we do from a physical safety perspective? If you were walking through the foyer of your workplace and there was a safety hazard there was a trip hazard or a spill, someone had dropped something, you wouldn't just go, oh, crikey, I hope someone picks that up. You would go, all right, we need to actually make sure that no one trips on that and harms themselves. So you would talk to somebody in building maintenance or in the safety team and say, hey, can someone come and address this? Even if you were rushing off somewhere else, you'd take a beat and you'd make sure that someone was going to address that. If you walked into a room and there was electricity sparking out of a plug on the wall, you'd do the same. You wouldn't just go, oh, crikey, hope that doesn't blow up. You'd call someone. And so from a psychosocial perspective, if team members understand what to look for, and they can actually have those conversations at a team level, hey, I'm feeling a little bit of pressure this week because this deadline and this have coincided, and this is, my computer broke yesterday, whatever it is. What do we actually have as a team to pull together for those resources? When's it something we can't address at a team level, and how do we channel that up? What is the pathway to escalate that in the organisation?
Yes.
That actually takes the responsibility off of just safety or just off of the leaders, and it makes everyone's responsibility. And given psychosocial safety is the systems in place around the way we design and manage work behaviours and work equipment, you want it to be based on all the people contributing. You don't want it to be just a once a year engagement survey, which is really about their engagement, but you threw in one psychosocial question, one that doesn't meet your regulatory requirements, but two, it's also not going to give you something meaningful once a year to do it. But ongoing, if you build into your teams that we actually all contribute to what we're creating here.
Yes.
And we don't give you responsibility for fixing it without the resources, but here is a pathway to escalate it when you don't have the resources at your level. Yes,
and that culture within a team of we're all adults and we are responsible for what it's like here. I had a very clever client say to me the other day we're both working with a particular manager whose team's very frustrated because they have very difficult people in the team for numerous reasons, and the team feels that the manager's not dealing with these people. And it's a very complex situation for the manager. And this client and I were talking about the fact that if the team, one of the things we're looking to create with the team is a culture where they own their team culture and they own their agreements around how they'll work together, and they create a team covenant for this is kind of how we do it around here. And as a part of that, do what you're saying and go, this is about all of us. And I think there is something, it's a different topic, but I think there is something about the way organisations treat staff like children that has them act like children when they're experienced, wise people that will have useful things to say if they're given the opportunity and are explicitly told, we all own this. But the simplicity of it is what I like the most, in terms of, if I'm a manager and I want to start making a difference while the organisation's doing whatever they do, I'm going to meet with my people once a week. I'm going to treat them like human beings. I'm going to be respectful. I'm going to own if I make a mistake. I'm going to be willing to be vulnerable. On a broader scale, if people go, great, I've got that, but how do I actually learn about psychosocial risk, know what I should be applying? If senior people are listening to this, so there's yourself, so they can literally have yourself and your company come in. Will you remind everyone the name of your company, Tasha?
Blooming Minds.
Okay.
And we have online training and resources that people can access, as well as in person. And, you know, I think that there's a real need to make sure that when we're addressing these issues, we are addressing them from an evidence base. So making sure that we're engaging with the appropriate expertise. WorkSafe and the different safety regulators around Australia have great information on their websites, which can be a really good starting point.
Awesome.
For organisations to make sure that what you're actually hearing matches up with what the regulators are actually saying and asking for. And checking that there is an evidence base behind the work, and either that it's evidence-informed or evidence-based, to make sure that we're not putting something in our workplace that then creates further risks. I think that's really important. Something you said before, though, in terms of treating people like adults at work and engaging with them in that way, I think it's also important to acknowledge that, yes, and we sometimes see that in the current work environments, there are some sometimes unhelpful behaviours that may conflate and muddy these waters a little bit more. So I'm thinking, I had an example with a client yesterday where they were talking about the increase in psychosocial hazard claims that are coming through, but some of it is just actually about people being performance managed. And that when we're doing awareness raising and educating about psychosocial safety in our workplaces, we need to distinguish the difference between what is actually you've been exposed to a hazard and what is you've been given instructions at work that are actually reasonable instructions. Or you and I have had conflict in a meeting, and adults will sometimes have conflict. And that we can learn how to advocate for ourselves and to voice our experiences and to get any support needs we have. But that doesn't mean we always have to be agreeing with everything all the time for it not to have been a hazard. So we need to do some education around the nuances of, you know, you mush enough humans together in a workplace and you're going to get behaviours that sometimes are not the way I would approach something, the communication style I would use, the things that would be important to me to focus on in that topic may be different to what's true for you. And neither of us are necessarily bullying or harassing the other. We're just having different experiences. And so there's a real nuance there, I think, to being able to have conversations around the difference and to be able to encourage these are the pathways when no, it does actually meet that element that you are being bullied or harassed, or that behaviour is inappropriate, versus that behaviour is uncomfortable, or that was a difficult conversation, or, oh, crikey, I feel a bit vulnerable hearing that feedback. But that doesn't mean that you've actually created a psychosocial hazard for me necessarily.
I love that. I love that. It is so useful because these waters, particularly over the years, long before this, have become muddied around bullying alone. Like you gave the great example of performance management versus bullying. You know, it can be a defence that's used. I'm being bullied rather than I'm underperforming and I'm being spoken to appropriately and I don't like it, so I'm going to say that I'm being bullied. And the thing I hate most about it actually is when it's used in that more manipulative way, whether the person realises it or not. Of course, it impacts the people that have had a true experience, that have only raised it because it is actually true that they are in that situation or they're under a level of stress or de-stress that needs to be managed. And I think it adds to people's cynicism around this whole topic, right? Because they're like, oh, yeah, you know, I can so imagine an older leader, the eye roll, oh, yeah, psychosocial risk because all these butterflies can't handle. And it is really muddies a very important, useful topic that will improve everyone's life, including the person who's rolling their eyes, right?
So I think we just need to focus on clarifying that when we're doing that awareness raising, having those conversations in the workplace. And that's another reason why activating this discussion at a team level is really powerful, because what we're doing is we're talking about what are the practical things in the way we work day to day that, you know, are pressures, that are too much. What are the things we can do about it and what are the things we can't? But I think that in fairness to organisations, they're trying to do this in a broader cultural landscape that's not doing this very well.
That's right.
We're very good at dividing along, you know, position lines. We're very good at counselling anyone who's got a different perspective than us, even if that different perspective was 20 years ago, when, to be fair, our perspective was probably different 20 years ago as well.
Right.
We're not good at seeing that in a way of the nuances of that human experiences. We're much more likely to just divide. And that division then in workplaces has to be addressed in a way that we're not even doing necessarily in our families, in our communities, in our neighbourhood relationships. So it does get tricky in workplaces. So I'm not pretending that all of this is simple and we just need to humanise work. And no, you're dealing with humans and humans are tricky.
That's right.
But if we want to keep some humans engaged in work and not just, you know, put everything to AI and robots, then we need to get good at the humanness of work. Yes. And that means understanding that, yes, in a current cultural context, some of these discussions are even trickier. But that doesn't mean that they're not important and not possible.
Yes, yes, beautifully said. The part about the community and people and families, for me, to be able to manage these things with others, one needs to have the courage to look at what some of their own things are, right? What's their own triggers, what's their own misbehaviours, where's their ego running? And that, I think, is a big ask, particularly when it's connected to the cliched corporate world where it's like, oh, no, you know, we don't look at any of that. But, of course, if you don't look at any of that, that's where the tribal stuff comes from. It's where the unacceptance, the lack of compassion, the judgmental. So I think you're right to say it's not easy. But what I love about this conversation is it's not easy and there would be many frustrations for people, but there is access to paths. And you've talked about your business, WorkSafe. What I'll do is I'll link anything in this show notes that could be useful as well. And hopefully it will allow people to get in touch with you, which would be, for me, it would be ideal with your level of expertise. But if that's not a possibility or they don't have the agency to have that happen within their organisation, at least they're going to have this and some further information that they can look at to reduce this, for them, often an extra stressor in an already stressful world that they're in.
Yeah.
Have we missed anything that you think would be useful?
The thing I always start with our clients on is it's not just about removing the problems in your workplace, and it's not just about taking a box-ticking approach to looking at what do you do about hazards. The bigger picture is how do we make work really good for your people so we get the best out of them, both for them and the business. They stick around longer. We know productivity will improve. We know that people's experience at work can be dramatically enhanced because we've had that experience when we've worked either in ourselves or with those really awesome teams, that it's not about it always being happy, but it's about it being positively directioned and connected and, you know, we're working towards something together. So that is really possible. It just takes the vision to actually include that rather than just focus on the risks.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. What's the actual point and what can be the actual outcome? How cool, man. Thanks so much for the work you do. I couldn't appreciate it more.
Thanks.
Thanks for being here today.